First of all, welcome. For those of you that have just joined, my name is Steve Kenzie. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network UK. I'm welcoming you to the first in our series of webinars on Black Lives Matter and business. We are absolutely delighted to announce that this series is being funded by the NatWest Group, and with their support, that's enabling these really important conversations to take place. NatWest are one of our members, active participant in the UN Global Compact and the Global Compact Network UK. We really appreciate their help in supporting this initiative to support businesses in progressing this really critical issue and to learn from the series. And obviously they're looking forward to learning from it themselves. Next slide, please, Carla. I'm just going to take a moment because we have quite a number of people joining this webinar that might not be familiar with UN Global Compact. This is our 20th anniversary, launched in 2000 by Kofi Annan, to unite not just business, but to unite business with the rest of society by aligning business operating globally with universal principles in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. Next slide, please, Carla. It started with 40 companies back in 2000 that signed up to this commitment, and it has grown into a global movement now with over 11,000 companies participating and another 3,500 non-business organizations. Our principles are derived from UN treaties, so they're truly universal. Wherever you're operating in the world, these principles are meaningful. Next slide, please. To join the Global Compact requires a commitment from your CEO, a genuine, heartfelt commitment that is going to be in the public domain. The CEO needs to send a letter to the UN Secretary General. I'm slowing down now. I'm wondering, Carla, did you get the next slide message? Or are we having a technical difficulty? There it is. The commitment from the CEO is in three parts. Firstly, to operationalize the Global Compact's 10 principles throughout your business. And that means supply chains, that means in everything that you do. Secondly, there's a requirement to report annually on the progress that you're making towards that first commitment. And thirdly, to support the wider UN development agenda. Next slide, please. As I said, there are many companies that have made this commitment, and we hope that some of you, if you haven't already, might start thinking about doing so. Here in the UK, there are already 558 organizations that are participating in Global Compact, and our UK network organizes, it says 30 on the slide, but this year we've gone a little overboard, more than 50 events for our network members and other stakeholders to engage around the broad scope of issue areas that we're addressing, our 10 principles, as well as the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. Which brings me starting to focus in a little bit more on what we're here for today. The question of Black Lives Matter is absolutely fundamental to our agenda, to the commitments that companies have made. The first principle, businesses should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights. And the second principle, make sure that they are not complicit in human rights abuses. And the sixth principle, the elimination of discrimination and respect of employment and occupation. And this slide shows you how those principles map across to the SDGs, and Goal 8, Goal 10, Goal 16, Goal 17 are all closely related to many of the issues that are linked into Black Lives Matter and the fundamental problems with our society that this movement has really brought to the surface. We want to do our part by mobilizing our member companies as well as wider society here in the UK and beyond, and hence our interest in taking this further. And now I'm delighted to hand off to my colleague Cynthia, who will tell you a little bit more about this series. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to actually join this webinar today. I just wanted to talk really briefly about how we got here. Right after the movement started, I, for one, was shaken up. I mean, it's like my whole world was completely changed. It's like I saw things completely different. It's like my rose tinted glasses were taken off by force and I had to see the world in a completely different way. And the kind of person I am, I'm action orientated. I hate injustice. And I put it to the team that we should do a webinar on this. We should do something. And my team, as supportive as they were, myself and my colleague Carla, who's also here, developed this webinar series. We really wanted, there was a lot going on right after the death of George Floyd, and the protests were happening globally. And there were loads of different webinars popping up. Some of them were great, some of them not so great. But we wanted to actually take our time to develop something for the wider business community, something that businesses could be able to take away tangible learnings, tangible understandings, and take it back into their offices, in which they can really, really actualize the truth that Black lives do matter. That in the sense that it stops being a moment and it really becomes a movement within within corporate culture. Internally, the Global Compact Network UK, we've been on our own journey. It's been an experience, not just for us, but I imagine for all of us, and we're all in the same playing field. And so it only just makes sense that we feel like we have to play a role in this journey in regards to helping other businesses. And so this is why we've created this. I've just kind of left here a few different captions that have, or captions and images and books that really have, struck me in this time, and I hope strikes you too as I've left it here. But just moving on to the next slide, please. So this is the webinar series. You're at the first one, which is Black Lives Matter in Business Storytelling. And there's 4 other webinars that go along with this series. And I just want to implore you that it's not just a one and done. This is a journey. It's a process, that you actively have to continue to learn, or make the choice to continue to learn. So I want to invite you to the rest of the webinar series, in which we have where to start, recruitment, retention, advancement, and changing corporate culture, which is going to be a high-level senior panel. And I just want to say thank you again to NatWest Group, who have decided to support us on this journey. So yeah, I'm just going to hand over to Joe Appleby, who will be hosting and moderating the rest of this webinar. I hope you enjoy, I hope you learn, and I hope you are impacted.
Thank you so much, Cynthia and Steve. And I just feel your energy, Cynthia, and your determination to turn something pretty bad into something really valuable for us all. So I'm really excited about the whole webinar series, and urge you to take part in all of them, not just to dip into the first. So yes, this is about storytelling. We are all holders and owners of some incredible stories. And we've also been on the receiving end of incredible stories. Stories that have really moved us, stories that have provoked huge emotion. You probably sense that from Cynthia's story. Stories that fill us with sadness and fear. Stories that fill us with anger and frustration. And stories that fill us with hate and love and hope. And that's what this is about. Stories often and can evoke not only emotion but action, and that's what we're thinking about as well. It enables us to see things in a different light. It enables us to want to do something in a different way. And sometimes stories really challenge our own truths. It challenges what we believe to be true. So today I'm delighted that we're going to be joined by some story makers, some storytellers, people who are willing and able to share their stories with us. So today we have the Baroness Young of Hornsey, who is going to be sharing her stories around the history of Black people in corporate Britain. And then we're going to hear from 3 different Black professionals working in organisations across the UK. They'll be sharing courageously their stories, what they've experienced working in different organisations over their working lives. There's going to be an opportunity for us to discuss some of their stories and maybe listen to some of your questions that you have, and we can maybe pose those to the panel. And then there's going to be an opportunity to hear again from Lola Young, and I'll be wrapping up. So it's a really tight agenda. We've got a lot to get in. And just with that, if you can go on to the next slide, please. There's just a few things I want to acknowledge. Like, we're in a big space. We might not be in the same room. We're sitting maybe by ourselves, or maybe in an office. We're sitting in a kitchen or a lounge, or if like me, I'm sitting in the conservatory. It's getting quite warm. But whilst we're working and listening virtually, we're still using the same space. So there is going to be an opportunity, as some of you have already done, to share your thoughts and ask some questions using the chat format. I'd ask you to be respectful of others' opinions. You may hear stories that do evoke emotion. And I would ask you, before you share your thoughts, to think about who is it in service of? Who are those thoughts in service of? It's a great opportunity for us to share here, but be respectful of others' opinions and be kind. Chatham House rules for today, please, recognising that some people will be sharing some stuff that's close to them, that feels quite exposing. So please, again, be mindful of that when people are doing it. We are going to be recording this session, but we'll only be sharing it to registered participants only. And finally, I just want to talk about taking responsibility for our learning. So there's an opportunity here just to be passive, just to listen and walk away. But there's also an opportunity for us to think about, like, why are we here? What might be useful for you to take back into your organisations, or into your communities, or into your family? What might be a good outcome for you? You're spending the next hour, and I really appreciate you coming into this space and sharing an hour of your time with us, but maybe have a little bit of a moment to think about what's going to be useful for you. Throughout this hour that we have together, I am going to be asking and posing some questions for you to think about what you've noticed and what you've heard. So that's all from me now. Just in terms of, I don't need that slide yet. That slide's at the end, thank you. We can just go on to doing faces now, if that's possible. Okay, so just my face for now. So I would like to now introduce our first speaker, history of Black people in corporate Britain. And we are going to hear from, I can see her now, lovely to see you, the Baroness Young of Hornsby OBE. She's an actress, former actress, and activist, and a peer consultant in government. So if I'd like to hand over to you, please. I'll turn my camera off.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jo, and thanks to Steve and to Cynthia for setting up this session this afternoon. It's been very interesting, of course, being around at this particular moment, having been active around these issues for more decades than I care to remember, but thinking about the way in which this particular moment fits in along this kind of both continuity and discontinuity of history. And I suppose one of the things that I always say in relation to this subject, and indeed others, is that there's no point, don't say there's nothing changed, because everything always changes. Everything is always changing all the time. The problem is, for us and people who care about justice and social justice, is that the change and the progress, or the change that is made, isn't always progressive in the way that we would like it to be. And sometimes it feels like you take 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back. But the point is that change does happen. And I think that's really important to hold on to, because otherwise it can feel like, well, what's the point? Because nothing ever changes. That is wrong. This particular moment is also interesting in terms of the responses to the murder of George Floyd, in as much as it's provoked another round, perhaps a more intense round of what I would think of as the culture wars, often associated with the USA, but now very readily imported into this country. And by that, I mean there's a war, there's a struggle over who owns meaning and who owns a representation of whom. And that is part of what I want to talk about today, because this issue of I can't do a history of Black people's involvement in corporate Britain in less than 10 minutes, but I can just make some indications, some pointers and some suggestions as to some of the kind of interesting highways and byways along that story. And this will be peppered with my own experience, largely in the public sector, but working particularly more recently with a lot of private sector organizations too. But when I first was discussing the content of this piece with Cynthia and Bea and others last week, I said, well, I think Ignatius Sancho can probably lay claim to be one of the earliest of Black entrepreneurs that we know of in this country. And that was in the 1770s. So, you know, shout out for Ignatius Sancho, who opened a grocer's shop not far from the Houses of Parliament in between sort of Westminster and Mayfair. And so that there is a sense in which, you know, obviously entrepreneurialism and the world of commerce and business is not something that is strange to Black people of African descent, and yet it's treated as though we're a late entry into that scene. That is not the case. When I first started work, it was with the organization doesn't even exist anymore, one of the utilities. And I think one of the sort of overriding sort of themes that I can point to, not just in work, but in terms of culture and society, it comes to hair and skin quite often, particularly when you think about microaggressions. The number of comments that you get about your hair and your skin tone and suntans and all of that stuff. So when we talk about the kinds of environment in which many of us work, it is really, really difficult. So you're in a room of white people and people are talking about their holidays that they've been on and the suntans they've got. And there's this kind of part of you inside that thinks, please don't say anything about my suntan, because of course we all go darker in the sun. But there's an issue though, perhaps more seriously, about the ways in which Black people are seen and the ways in which Black people are stereotyped, particularly in colonial and imperial history, that means that we're not trusted to do certain things. And certainly when I was acting, there was a really interesting phenomenon that we always used to joke about, those of us on the now defunct Afro-Asians Committee of Equity, when we would have discussions with television producers and directors about what we used to call integrated casting. And they would say, as if it was something completely fantastical, well, surely you wouldn't expect us to cast a Black man as a bank manager. And that's particularly relevant today, as I note the contribution of Nat West to this series of seminars. And I'm not trying to say anything specifically about banking, but I've got there's a little bit of a thread around banking that is really interesting, actually, in regard to my experience of race and so on within the corporate sector. And that you can think of things like the difficulty that Black people have in getting loans to start up their business, because often it's said, well, you know, you can't get a job in the mainstream business, start up your own. And as I've already said, Black people are often very, very entrepreneurial, but getting the loans that will enable you to start off becomes really difficult. So this comment about Black bank managers always used to, as I say, make us laugh. And then if you kind of fast forward, and this illustrates what I mean about progress and change and so on. There you've got a whole suite of advertisements in the 80s, I think, featuring Harold, the Black bank manager of, I think it was the Halifax Bank. And it was like, oh, well, this is interesting, because now you can finally have a Black manager, although he's got to be singing and dancing and seen to be a very fun kind of a person. So, you know, there's the ways in which stereotypes feed into everything that we do and the way that we think about things, and the corporate world is not exempt from that. Another bank experience, and I promise you, NatWest, this will be my last one, is talking to somebody actually from a private bank, not from NatWest at all, but from a private bank, and talking about their recruitment policies and saying how they select people. And this person that was head of the recruitment of graduates said, well, we only look at applications from people who've been to Russell Group universities. So it's not even about, you know, extending your thoughts to thinking about people who come from outside of university. It's within a very narrow group, with this particular example of the people that are seen to be trustworthy, acceptable, and so on and so forth. And so we can see how there's also this kind of nexus of class, along with race, and of course with gender and disabilities and all those other aspects of our social identities that get wrapped up under this term in intersectionality. I'm not quite sure how I'm doing for time, but if I can just smuggle in a couple more remarks. Okay, thank you. I'm getting a thumbs up there, which is great. Much of my recent work has been around modern slavery and trying to have an impact on getting rid of exploitative and forced labor. And a lot of that, most of that work for me has been with the corporate sector in view of the legislation that we now have in place. It's been really interesting to me, post George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, talking to those same people about race and racism, they don't make the connections. So one of the things I would say to corporate sectors, those of you who really embrace this struggle against exploitative and forced labor, have you made the connections between race, racism, and those exploitative forms of labor? And if so, what is it that you're doing within your organization to address those issues? Because to me, they're inextricably linked. And so it's all right to say, yes, we're against, everybody says, yes, we're against modern slavery. But as soon as you ask people to say something meaningful and take some meaningful action against racism, oh, that's politics. We don't want to go there. You know, that's, well, yes, we can all say we're against racism, but, you know, surely you don't expect us to. And then there's a whole list of, you know, these frightening things like quotas and targets that are invoked. And then I guess just my final point would be to say that much of my work has also been about creative industries and working within the creative and cultural industries, which like to think themselves as being exempt from this kind of, they're only very recently acknowledging the extent to which all of these issues have impacted upon the ways in which they operate too. And I think that's important to knowledge. And it's a prime example of an industry where it's like who you know, with whom can you network, who's in your, used to be Filofax, and now of course I guess it's your iPhone. Who are those people that you know and that you always call upon time and time again without thinking much more broadly? I think I probably leave my remarks at that for now, because I'm aware that there are other speakers who are waiting to contribute too. So thank you.
Thank you, Lola. You can leave your camera on if you like for a minute or two. Be nice to see you again. Thank you for that. That was a whistle-stop tour. There was a lot that you covered in a relatively short, you've done this before, haven't you? I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things actually. What are you, the banking thing is interesting. I think for all of you out there in the banking sector, work to still be done in there for sure. Great that NatWest is sponsoring this. You talked about making this link between racism and the exploitative nature. What do you think the barriers are for taking action on that for businesses? Like you're saying, they're noticing, they're seeing the links, but they're not doing. Is that because it's in its infancy? Is that because this is a new field for you, or?
No, I mean, I don't think they are seeing links is part of what I'm saying between a kind of, if you like, a generic anti-racist position and fighting exploitative labor systems. The prime victims of exploitative labor and forced labor are Black and brown people. They make up a huge percentage of those. And so what is it that in certain people's psyche that thinks it's all right to exploit those people over there in a way that they wouldn't necessarily think about doing over here, you would not, for example, you know, if you were excavating for oil here, as we have indeed done further up the country, you know, if you wouldn't imagine lighting flares to burn off gases, settlements, okay, in Nigerians, but and to your point about the barriers, you know, often it's invoked, well, you know, our first priority is to our shareholders, or to, you know, anybody who's invested in us, and to our company, we've got to make financial profit. But really, you know, thankfully there is a group, there's an expanding group of businesses which say, well, hold on a minute, you know, what's the point in making profit if you're killing people in the environment? So what we need to do is through cost of goods that we buy, and what is it that we really value, and that's got to be the triple bottom line of people, planet and profit. And that does mean, actually, it's not about tinkering with your systems. You can't say we're anti-racism without admitting to systemic racism. Once you admit to systemic racism, it means you have to change your systems. Because if you just tinker with the systems, you're just tinkering at the edges. If you don't change those systems, then you will still have systemic institutionalized racism in all its forms. And likewise within the exploited labor. In order to exploit labor to the extent that some companies do, out of sight, down their supply chains, it means they have to not be thinking about human beings, not be thinking about the victims as human. And that is not acceptable.
Great, thank you for that. And I think you touch on something that's really important, and that is the fact that we are part of a system, we're part of multiple systems, and actually, in order to change one part of it, we have to recognize that there's multiple parts that need to be addressed, and it's a slow process. At the same time, action needs to be taken. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Lola. I really appreciate it. We're now going to move on to something which is, I guess, a little bit more personal, to some extent, because we have 3 people who are joining us who are going to share their stories. Now, what we're going to do for this next part is we're going to hear this. We're going to give 5 minutes to each person, and they're going to tell us their experiences of microaggression, experiences of discrimination, experiences and the stories of feeling marginalized or feeling like they can't bring their full self to work. Now, in order for us to listen to these stories, we are just going to tell you their first name, and we're not going to tell you the organization that they're working with. The conversation that we had yesterday went something like this. People still feel slightly concerned about the consequences of them telling their stories. So it's still quite fragile. So I really applaud the next 3 people who are going to share their stories. One thing that I recognize is when something like George Floyd's story hit, it was evoked in a massive amount of emotion and frustration and anger and hurt. Sometimes there are gray areas where it's not big enough to necessarily step out immediately, but it's constant and it happens all the time. And I think perhaps that makes it maybe harder for us to challenge it, harder for us to step out and do something about it. So while you listen to these stories, I just want you to kind of see what you notice. What do you notice about these stories? So first of all, I would like to hear from Owen, please. If you'd like to give us 5 minutes, Owen, on your experiences of working in different organizations, what you've come across, how it's made you feel. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here and to share my story. So I think we will have very much similar themes that do come up, like Baroness Young said, things about your skin color and your hair. And one particular story maybe that I can highlight today is I came back from Ghana earlier this year, and when you go to the African continent, at least for myself. I like to get my hair done because it's cheaper. And I just prefer it there, right? And so I had really long braids in, extensions, and I've very much been used to this over the course of my life, through school and through different working situations where people are so fascinated by my braids or my fake locks when I do have those in, or indeed my natural hair texture. But the one thing that I just can't seem to wrap my head around every single time is why people feel that they're in, that they have the freedom to just walk up to me and touch my hair. I would see maybe my white colleagues, or even other colleagues who have different hair texture than mine, straighter textures. Maybe they get a haircut, or they get a perm over the weekend, or a curl, or whatever it is. You look at it, you say, oh, you had a haircut. Oh, you did something to your hair. That's lovely. That's nice. Not to come up to them, invade their space, and try to touch their hair. It's very dehumanizing in so many different ways. And I was in a situation recently where a colleague did that to me when I got back from Ghana. And she came up to me and tried to grab my braids. And my instant reaction was no. And her reaction was to kind of feel like, oh, I didn't realize I can't touch your hair. And it almost made me feel like I needed to apologize for not wanting her to touch my hair. But at the same time, I'm like, actually, no, this is not, appropriate. Yes, we're colleagues. Yes, we have, a rapport, but it's still a professional setting, and we should still have, mutual respect for each other. Even if you were going to touch my hair, you could ask. You wouldn't just like grab it. It's just basic etiquette. It's basic how you just treat other people. And sometimes I find when I have this discussion, maybe in spaces that are not amongst my maybe Black friends or Black colleagues, people are like, oh, it's just hair. But I'm like, it's more than that. It's the fact that my person is almost, people feel like they can have access to me because I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the color of my skin. I don't know what exactly it is, because I don't understand why anyone should feel comfortable going up to someone and touching their hair, amongst many other things. Maybe if I still have some time, there was also a situation where I was having a conversation. Great. I was having a conversation, and it was about George the poet, who declined the MBE earlier. Was it this year or last year? And there was a lot of brouhaha about the fact that he shouldn't have let himself be nominated in the first place, which is a very good point. But I guess it was one of those things where maybe he thought this was a great thing for his career, but then later on had a reflection and thought, actually, these don't necessarily align with my beliefs, which I completely understand, and I can agree with him on. And I had this conversation with a colleague, and I don't think they meant bad. Absolutely don't think they meant badly. It's just, I guess there's a lot of unconscious ignorance, I think, that exists amongst corporate spaces. And this colleague says, oh, but he ought to be grateful that he can be in the UK, and other Africans as well, along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but it struck me, and I'm like, excuse me, why would you tell me as an African that I ought to be grateful to have a place in the UK and to also be a British citizen? It really struck me that someone as educated as my colleague is, and as well-traveled, and honestly, there's just no justification apart from just the fact that it's like just an unconscious or willful ignorance that you would say that because I'm not white British, or your typical what a British person would be like, I ought to be grateful for being able to exist in this space. Especially because there's a very long history of Britain's relationship with Africa that is so complex and so filled with different levels and layers of injustices, that to say that is very condescending and incredibly ignorant. And I definitely checked that person on that and said, actually, you can't say that. And I explained why they couldn't say that. And while it's great to give teachable moments like that, it can be extremely exhausting. One thing I always say is my existence as a Black person can be extremely exhausting because I have to explain my existence. I have to explain why I react to things a certain way. I have to always kind of question people's reaction to me, especially within white spaces, which is one of the things that motivates me. I think ultimately, personally, for me, I would love to move back to my home country where I was born, just so that it would eliminate that level of, if I have to deal with discrimination, maybe on the grounds of gender, on the grounds of so many other things, because we all face different discriminations in life. One thing that I don't want to have to live with for the rest of my life is discrimination based on the color of my skin, which I have absolutely no control of. And when, for me, the motivation to maybe want to move back to a corporate space where people look like me is to just remove that layer of quote unquote insecurity that I just don't have to live with. And so I guess that would just wrap up my story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pause this for 30 seconds, but the question I'd like you to think about and to maybe answer, and you can do that in chat or you can do it, write it down on a piece of paper as I've done, is what did you notice about what you've just heard? What did you notice about what you've just heard? Thank you, Oyen. The thing that I noticed was something that you said at the beginning, which was, I've got used to this. You talked about your hair being touched, but you just made the comment and it came out so casually. I just get used to it. Almost about how much are we humanizing some of this stuff? How much do we just accept that's just the way it is when it's not okay? There's some other things too, but I'd like us to move on. So Chris, if it's possible, with the same format really, if you can share your stories and experiences, and again for the audience to listen actively, think about whether or not that's something you've heard before, you've experienced before. Maybe it's your story too. Maybe you really align with what you're hearing. Just take note of that while we listen for the next 5 minutes. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, and thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. Yeah, so for me, I suppose I'll split it into two. I've got some, slightly kind of more humorous examples, and then more serious ones. So I'll start with the more humorous ones. So, for example, I'm, by way of background, I come from Ghanaian heritage. So my parents are from Ghana. I was born in the UK. And so one of the traditional kind of delicacies in terms of food is jollof rice. And, so there's always kind of a comment when I bring it into the office, etc. I'm from kind of a tech consulting background. So I work for a global tech multinational company. And and so it's like, oh, do you like spice, or do you like spicy food? And to be fair, I order, mango and lime at Nando's. And so I am very much, just cannot do spice at all. And then, I can also kind of correlate with the stories that Baroness Young mentioned. So just comments like, oh, Chris, I'm nearly as dark as you, after a holiday. And, or, comments like, oh, Chris, do you like rap or grime or R&B music, or, or can you dance? And to be fair, I do like rap and, R&B and grime, etc. And to be fair, I do have some ruthless dance moves, I must say. But, you know, I suppose in all seriousness, you know, these are, you know, some of the microaggressions and comments, etc. And then it goes on to, you know, kind of like, you know, more sexualizing comments in the office, whereby, you know, it's, you know, being referred to as kind of chocolate, or, you know, that saying, when you go black, you never go. I'll leave you to finish that off. So, you know, that's all been said to me, you know, in various different elements, and, you know, in more serious kind of examples relating to kind of after work drinks, etc. And, you know, people asking if I have any drugs, or if I knew anyone that could provide some drugs. And I can attest, I don't do drugs, yeah, etc. So, yeah. And then in, you know, more serious kind of matters. So, you know, comments regarding, oh, you speak very well for, you know, not being racist, a black person. And, you know, I had to, you know, with that particular comment, you know, it's not just, you know, the once or twice, that's happened several times, in various different capacities. And, you know, I have to kind of articulate and really understand, you know, what do you mean by that comment? And, you know, what are you referring to, you know, black people not being able to speak properly? And what do you define as, you know, speaking properly? And then, you know, so just, I mean, this particular story, which actually took me back for 6. So there was talking about, you know, topic of diversity in the corporate scene with a client. And he flippantly said, you know, there's no need for diversity and inclusiveness schemes, and, you know, some of these campaigns to get more, you know, BAME, etc., and LGBT and more diversity into the city. And you know, I was, and he, you know, he actually said, oh, it's just too much of a PC culture. And, you know, I had to go back and say, no, hold on, you know, and actually educate that individual around that. And in the end, he actually apologized and said, no, I completely understand, you know, why it's important and why it's needed. And, you know, sorry for my earlier remarks. And, you know, I didn't report him or, you know, anything else, but I took the time to try and educate that individual. And then I suppose there's this, coming from my background, and I'll be very transparent. So I am from inner London. You know, from a fairly deprived area. And back in the days, it was very, very, very tricky. Single parent household. And, you know, there is, I suppose, kind of a narrative whereby, I suppose, you go into a corporate scene and you're almost seen as like the token or CSR kind of ploy, you know. And so, you know, I've had comments whereby, you know, oh, how did you get here? Or, you know, how did you join this company? And, you know, it's the same way you joined this company. So, you know, comments whereby, oh, did you kind of come on a scheme or a diversity scheme, you know, that sort of thing. And so for me, it's been really, really important. I've taken kind of the step and the narrative to just try and educate and not dismiss. I can, you know, can attest, and I can say confidently that, you know, it does get frustrating. It gets frustrating. It's, you know, obviously time consuming, but I do believe in, you know, fighting a good fight, and, you know, I am trying to, you know, educate, and I try and, you know, see the good in people. And, you know, I always, I'm not trying to excuse behavior, etc., or anything like that, but I understand and I'm cognizant of the fact that you may not have, you know, been from a similar background to myself. You may not have worked with a black person before, but I don't think that changes the fact that they are, you know, they are people, they are, you know, equivalent to yourselves. And so for me, that's where that whole education piece comes in. And I think employers and organizations need to do more to educate, you know, senior managers, you know, and just trickle that through to, you know, junior employees as well. And yeah, that I think, and I'll stop here. I'll just make my final point. I also think we have, we're in this sometimes a little bubble, a very progressive bubble. So in the corporate scene, etc. I mean, you all have joined this Zoom conference call today, but I always think of the rest of the UK and their mindset, and what, I suppose, how are we going to change that narrative? And I think sometimes we are kind of caught up in this little bubble, and we forget that there is people that their views, their narrative, etc., not aligned with us, and I see us to be slightly more progressive. So that's what I leave with. And yeah.
Thank you, Chris. A really balanced kind of stories there, but lots of them. I think I'm going to hold it, and I'm just going to ask everyone else to think about what you noticed, what that might say about you. Who does it remind you of? What does it make you think of? Is there anything in there that challenges maybe some of your behaviour, some of your actions when you've heard things or seen things, or maybe you've been the one saying something? So I'd ask that you just reflect on what we've heard, and we'll have silence for 30 seconds just while we do that. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
One thing that I notice, as I said, is the balance. You've got, I think it's about your attitude. There's a thumbs up there. He's gone straight to his thumbs up picture. Brilliant. Perfect timing there, Chris. Love it. And just your ability to, I kind of noticed that you try and find the humour in it. I mean, if there is any humour, but also there was a relentless amount of stories, so many examples. And from a white person's point of view, I haven't experienced that. And that's really quite hard sometimes, just because I'm not haven't experienced the same daily and often difficult language that's quite isolating and inappropriate. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. So Keji, if it's possible for you to give 5 minutes, and then we're going to have a quick Q&A. There's been some great questions that have come up, which I'd like to present to the panelists, but 5 minutes from you, please, if that's possible, to finish. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Keji, and I am of Nigerian heritage, but I was born and raised in the UK. And I think the earliest stories really is from the outset, my parents always saying to me, well, you're an ambassador for Black people if we're living in this country, because you have to assume that they're going to think the worst of you. And so, like, the extra good, extra kind, extra, just got a lot of pressure to put on someone, but that really was my experience there. And I think my whole life was always never anything major happening, but little things that made me just notice that, like, things weren't quite right. And a silly example is at school, I'll start there. At school, I had my confirmation, and we had to wear skin-colored tights, and my mother had sent me skin-colored tights, and my house mistress was shocked, and she was like, those aren't skin-colored tights, these are skin-colored tights, to the extent that she made me wear, like, a white person's skin-colored tights for my confirmation, so the ones my mother had sent. And by the time my mother showed up, she was absolutely furious. But in all the pictures till this day, that's like the thing that just upsets my family the most of those pictures, that I'm in skin-colored tights. But and less sort of humorous anecdotes, I suppose. I trained as a lawyer first, and I qualified as a barrister, never practiced. And one of my experiences there was one of our tutors at bar school was like, well, I'm surprised you picked the bar. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, I would have expected you to get down the solicitor route. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he was like, well, most people like you do that, and it's not really the norm for people like you to do the bar. And I remember asking, what do you mean people like me? And he was like, oh, no bother, let's move on. And it was kind of strange, because in that profession, I mean, I decided not to practice because it wasn't the right fit for me and my skill set, my personality, and a bit too sparkly for the bar. But even trying to get training contracts and trying to get jobs in that profession was insanely difficult, and like 4 times as hard as a Black person, not least because most of my peers had the networks and the contacts and the connections that they could use to get the work experience, the mini pupilages, and to build their profiles in that ecosystem, which would then serve them well when they went to apply for full-time training contracts. And yeah, I remember always, I'd ask like the inn I was in, I'd always ask, like, you know, do you have any opportunities, like how can you help people who don't have the networks and the like? And it was always, oh well, you know, you've just got to go build the networks, we can't help with the connections like that, they've done these themselves. And it was always really, it was quite demotivating, because I knew I was good, if not better than my peers there, but to get that opportunity was just, like I said, 4 times as hard. And it required me to be more creative and a lot of stalking in a legal way, and lots of perseverance just to get those initial conversations so I could get my foot through the door. And then even alongside like the bar training, when I was thinking about my professional life, when I was thinking about leaving, I knew that I would have a struggle sort of trying to transition. And every time I sent out a job application, I mean, I sent out twice as many as a lot of my peers who were also trying to make the transition out of the bar. And what I'd find was, if I'd sent it out and I hadn't heard back from someone, and I chased up, the minute I got on the phone, suddenly it was like, oh, we never saw your application. And because apparently I came across as more professional or well-spoken over the phone, as opposed to just looking at my name on a CV. And 9 times out of 10, as soon as I got on a call with them, everything was like, the doors would open and they'd be like, oh, we'd love to meet you, we'd love to interview, blah, blah, blah. But until that point, it was always that barrier that I just imagined my name was just on the stack of a pile and you scroll through. It's like, oh, Keji Mustafa, can't figure that out. Oh, sorry, I'm not allowed to say my second name, forgive me. And so that's been a hard lesson to learn, because it's kind of felt like it's an uphill battle in that sense, and just having to be twice as creative and be twice as, you know, like pushy, and just like, yeah, just being more creative to get in front of the right people, and then to be able to prove once I'm there that actually I can do this job with my eyes closed, and I'm better than, you know, like most candidates you'll have, because I have the relevant experience. But experience wasn't enough just on a stack, so that was that. And what I will say though is that in my career, the smaller organizations I've been a part of are the ones where I've actually felt like I can be more myself. I think that's usually because when it's a small team, you end up forging a close relationship with team members. And so people are generally more inquisitive about like who you are, and understanding you and understanding your experiences, and devising a space where everyone feels like an equal. I could be generalizing, but in my experience anyway, smaller companies have given me that feeling. Whereas larger organizations, not only has it been harder to think about navigating the workforce, but moving up, because I never saw people like me, like in higher roles. So it was almost impossible to imagine how you could get there. And that brought insecurities in terms of how you can move ahead and how you can think about, you know, moving up without coming across as pushy or aggressive or demanding, all those other awful adjectives that are used to describe women, and Black women in particular. So yeah, that's definitely been a thing. And I think what I'm really passionate about is helping businesses think about how they can make it more inclusive, and how they can close that gap, and how, you know, yeah, more diverse, so that the 14, 13-year-old at school who's looking around can see other people in these roles, or anyone who's in an entry-level role at these companies can see other people that look like them, and thus feel like, oh, that could be me one day. But I noticed that I've gone 2 minutes over time, so I shall wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Keji. I'm going to ask everyone again, what did you notice about what you heard? Does this sound like somebody else that you have spoken with that has this continual struggle with having to be even more creative? try even harder? Or are you in a position where you can think about recruitment, think about how you might be able to have a more transparent process? 30 seconds. What have you noticed? Have you seen any patterns? Has it made you challenge your own beliefs or mindsets? Keji, what I noticed was how tiring it must be for you. Just looking back from your background of your parents saying to you, okay, you're going to have to be really good. You're going to have to be better. You have to care more. You're going to have to try harder. And, you know, in some ways, that's a great thing to instill in our children, to have that desire to do well. But it comes from a place of, if you don't, you're not going to get on, rather than, I just want you to do well. So that's what I've noticed. And that's as a parent, you know, you want your best for your kids and you want them to do well, but you don't want it to be, because otherwise you're going to be kind of pointed at and not able to shine. So that's what I've noticed. And other people may have noticed other things. As I knew would happen, I hear people's stories and I just want to keep on going. So we are coming up to 3 o'clock, and there's been some great questions. One of the things I just wanted to quickly respond to was this idea of this unconscious bias. It's come up. People say, well, what do we do about it? Look, we know that unconscious bias, apparently there are about 150 of them. They are a great way for us to make shortcuts, to make decisions based on judgments, based on previous experience, based on our background, to make judgments about others or people or things. And the great thing about it is it happens immediately. The bad thing about it is our biases are often wrong. Like at the worst, you know, the best it can be is wrong. The worst it can do is be really damaging. And I think we've heard some examples of where it's really damaging. We just make assumptions about things, and we need to be aware of that. Now, we all have them. It's not something that it's not that some people have them, some people don't. We need to recognize that they exist. We need to know more about them. We need to hold our truths lightly. We need to be able to kind of stretch our thinking. We need to question ourselves when we just flippantly say something. Be curious about why we've said it. Maybe ask others. Maybe get some more information. Maybe read about them. Maybe understand where our biases lie. Often we need to think more critically at problems. We need to think more critically when we respond to things, rather than having this kind of a coin with two sides. Think of it like a diamond that has many, many different edges and layers to it, where we need to kind of really understand what's going on. That requires us to just stop and think before we make decisions. And the other thing is we need to challenge those assumptions. We need to be ready to listen to others. And that's what some of these stories I hope have helped you to do, is listen to others. These might be stories you have heard before, but encouraging you to think more about what you've heard. Think about yourself and how you can maybe challenge those assumptions. So I'm just going to there was a question here that I want to come up. It said, there was one question here which was about, and I'm taking us to the whole panel, and in that panel I would be including Lola as well. I think we're going to get one question, then it's going to have to go on to her. It was something that said, as a white person, I want to be able to stand up more, and I want to be able to take more action, but I'm not quite sure how to do it. Have you got any thoughts on what I could do? So I want to stand up to some things. Here I go. I want to help by calling people out, but I don't want to come across as a white savior. How can I balance the need to call people out while also being aware of not drowning out marginalized voices? Any thoughts? 2 minutes, would love to hear.
Shall I?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I haven't got anything definitive to say, because I suspect one of the reasons why nobody's actually leapt forward is because it is really difficult. You can't make a generalization about it. You know, people are talking about allyship, and you know, how do you be a good ally? But how can you move on from being an ally to being something that goes beyond simply being an ally? Because it kind of could be a bit passive. So then there's this distinction between being a bystander and an upstander, which I guess is what this person is talking about. Mm-hmm. How can you be an upstander? In some situations, it's really dangerous. So, you know, you don't put yourself in the path of danger, but you alert people to help with that situation. I've had people stand up for me in very courageous ways, which is always very kind of heartening. But as I say, I haven't got anything general to say in the workplace. So I guess it depends on who's running the mechanisms which to which you are supposed to be reporting any incidents like this. But I would think, you know, talk to your Black friends, talk to your, and I don't know what to say if you haven't got any. I'm not going to say go out and get yourself some, but it's you know, I once had to just, yeah, no, I won't go down that route. But
no, it's okay.
No, yeah, well, it was just a kind of jokey thing, you know. We some of us Black people, we were joking about setting up an agency to hire ourselves out for white folks so that they could say they had a best Black friend. But
you might,
but seriously though, as I say, I don't have a generic answer, because it depends so much on the circumstances. But there's a lot of reading material out there now. I answered this in relation to another question, and the book by what's her name? It was White Fragility by Robbins. I've forgotten her last name. White Fragility, which is really good, and there's some materials on the internet, of course. So there are lots of sources, but I think talking things through, and maybe with some other, with other people that feel similar or have had those experiences. Oh, thank you, Robin D'Angelo. Thank you, Neil.
So I just want to, so now we're getting very close to losing Lola because she's got another call, but I wanted to go out to others. Have you ever experienced someone in your organization who has, or in your team that has stood up, who has done something, has taken action, and what did that feel like?
I work with someone who works a lot in the diversity space, a white woman, and she's very vocal about racial injustice and things like that, and has tabled certain things towards senior management, especially in the wake of George Floyd and all the other injustices that have happened. So in that respect, yes, but in terms of as like a personal defense for me, no. Especially because I try not to, if I'm being very honest, I try not to engage in discussions centering around race when I'm at work, because I just feel like sometimes it just opens the door to, first of all, people disrespecting you unconsciously. And I'm like, I'm in a professional space. I don't want to be upset at work over a conversation that didn't even need to happen. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much.
Definitely. I don't like to talk about race at work, because it's just like it's like a Pandora's box, you know, like if something gets said that you feel really strongly about, you can't necessarily like respond in the way you'd want to respond. And I just don't want to I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to make others feel uncomfortable. But I will say in my team, there's a wonderful guy who has, I think the best thing he could do is like just put his hands up and say he didn't know what he didn't know. And then he just spent time and then he came to me and he was like, you know, is there anything you can share that it's worth me looking into? But apart from that, he also went off and did his own research. And I think that's really important, because sometimes it feels like, well, why should the pressure be on me to kind of help you navigate this topic, right? Like the internet is vast. You can put a few things in DIY, right? Like if I wanted to learn more about a topic, regardless of what it was, common sense would dictate I'd go see what I could find first, and then try and find others who might be able to help me build my viewpoint and perspective. But he's been really great for that, and he's been like, look, I'm totally learning, and it wasn't a flash in the pan either. Like ever since the movement, he's touched back on like, oh, Keji, I've read this, or what do you think about this, or this is what I'm thinking about this, and that's just been so powerful because his actions show me that he really cares, not just a lip service.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what it's about, isn't it? It's the deeds, not the words, that make the difference. And we need to have a lot more of that. I am going to just close that now because I'm aware that Lola is going to be leaving us. And I wanted her just to summarize for a few minutes before I do a kind of closing bit. So Lola, could you come back and give us a few closing remarks, maybe on what you've noticed?
So much to notice, and you know, it's always a mixture of sadness and what I can't think of, but yeah, it's a mixture of sadness and grief. But there's always this thing for me, which is the positivity of coming together, sharing those experiences, and then going back out into the world, whatever that world is, and taking with you. And it might be that you take with you, those of you who've had similar experiences, you know, that it's not just about you. I'm not sure that makes it feel any better, but at least it takes it away from that kind of personal, that something that you've done wrong. It isn't about something that you've done wrong. It's about what is this society, within this society. When you read history, you know, you can see exactly how Britain has come to this particular place. If you read through history, particularly the histories that you don't get taught at school, if you read those histories, you will know why this country has come to be in the mess, quite frankly, that it's in. So that's really important. And as I think it was Keji who last said, you know, go and read stuff, go and find out more about what's going on. Interesting about these race conversations. Some of us work in contexts where that's what we talk about. A lot of the work that I do at the moment, I can't not talk about race because that is what the work that I'm doing is about. So, and you know, that is also another kind of discussion, senior Black person or the most junior Black person, you know, within that room. So I guess I always come up with more questions than answers, but I think that if we don't keep asking, it's about finding the right questions to ask so that we can then get some of the right answers. I think, you know, the other thing I would say is that when we come together and say all these things, it can be very, very depressing or down-pressing or whatever. And I think the thing about that is it's not about wanting to cast ourselves in the role of victim. And I think we have to be really secure about that and say that this is not about adopting some kind of victimhood status, because there's that old adage which says, you know, today's victims are tomorrow's oppressors. So it's not about casting ourselves in that position, but it's about saying there are people that are continually attempting to victimize us. So how do we respond to that? And there is, you know, you do have to, I think, you know, in order to not just survive, but thrive, you have to develop a kind of strength that is being asked of you that isn't necessarily being asked of other people. And so it's about knowing all of these things go on and sharing all of this stuff is not to say that, oh my gosh, so there's no point, just got to give up and go away, but to say that, okay, this is the reality and this is what we have to deal with. And I think, you know, for many people, I would hope that there are some strong networks. That's the other thing, clearly not at work for everybody, but outside of work that sustain and help you to feel that you can thrive and not just survive. But we do, I don't know, I think we do need to, okay, so this society needs to work out particularly white people, have to work out what it is they're going to do in order to support this struggle, because this is not just about us. You know, as I always say, you know, if you've got a system that produces a police force, as in the USA, that consistently kills hundreds and hundreds of African American women, men, and children every year, that police force is not serving the country. So yes, of course, it's about discrimination and racism, but it is not good for anybody to live with a police force, a militia that's masquerading as a police force. We have some problems here too, of course, around policing and what happens to Black people. And again, it's like that police service is failing the wider population. And I think trying to, you know, talking about alliances isn't the same as saying, oh, we've got to water ourselves down in order to accommodate white folks, or we've always got to be teaching them stuff. It's about building those allyships, or those that sort of cadre of upstanders that are prepared to take on the challenge, you know, with regard to some of these really difficult situations. I think that's about it, really. But a very, very stimulating afternoon, and I hope that we'll get a chance to see some of the questions that didn't get answered, because it's always really good in terms of food for thought. So if I could just say thank you very much to everybody and leave, is that okay? I feel terribly rude doing that, but I double booked myself this afternoon.
That's absolutely fine. And I know we are only going for another couple of minutes anyway, or minutes. So thank you so much. And thank you actually, while I'm here, to all of our speakers and storytellers. It's been absolutely wonderful to hear your truths. And I hope that's kind of helped us, well, it's certainly helped me to see some of your truths and what you live with on a regular basis. And I kind of agree that it's quite, in some ways, it's quite sad, if I'm honest. But the action is not about Black people taking action, it's about collective action, which means we all have a part to play in that. We all have a network, we all have a sphere of influence, we all have people that we can talk to, we have the internet, which can provide us with an enormous amount of articles and information and content to help us better understand. It's not an easy process, it's not a quick process. Structural, systemic kind of change does not happen quickly, but I don't want that to be a reason to not take action, because that just means apathy, that just means not doing anything, and that is absolutely not going to help us move the agenda forward. So one thing I'd like to do just very quickly is just look at this model. This is something that we use at Impact. I don't work for UN Global Compact, I work for an organisation called Impact, and I've worked with UN Global Compact on a number of initiatives. But for me, this is all about taking leadership as action. And leadership is something that, it's not a hierarchical thing. It's not leader with a capital L. It's not an authoritative leader. It's us as individuals taking acts of leadership. And what I asked you to do today was just to notice what you'd heard. Often when we feel something, or often when we notice what's going on, we feel it before it gets in our heads. We know instinctively if something feels right or wrong because we feel it in our gut. Noticing often is about where something sits internally and how it makes us feel. Noticing is also then outwardly looking around and wondering if what you're noticing is similar to what other people are noticing. The challenge is, of course, what are you going to do with it? What have you noticed? Is it your responsibility to do something about it? Is it going to make a difference? The third part of this model is to act, is to do something. But you need to do something with who am I trying to serve in mind? So doing something with good intention. Often what gets in the way from noticing something, deciding what to do and taking action is fear. How many times have you seen something, and absolutely as a bystander, I've seen something and I've wanted to do something and I've talked myself out of it because I don't feel like I have the right to say it. I don't feel like it's going to be well received. I don't feel like I'll be looked upon well. I might have made a mistake. I might have noticed something that no one else noticed. So it requires a huge amount of courage If I think about the story and the experience of what Cynthia has been through, it's that feeling of injustice and this feeling of I've got to do something about it. It's deciding and noticing that there's nothing else out there right now, which is really helping business to make sense of this and to make sure they operationalize procedures within their organizations to tackle racism. She decided to do something about it. She's acted upon it. And now we've had more than just under 2,000 people sign up to attend these webinars because one person felt something and did something about it. So I'm not suggesting that we all go off and do something massive, but do think about what you can do within your own sphere of influence and how you might be able to support this movement going forward. So I've run out of time. I'm 3 minutes over. For those of you that are still here, thank you so much. Massive thanks to obviously Cynthia and the team of UN Global Compact for putting this series together. Please come along to the others. There's no point in just coming to this. And thank you to all of the participants who have signed up. Thank you to your questions. We will be looking at all of these. It's really useful to get a sense of what you are thinking and feeling around this agenda and what support you might need. And we really look forward to kind of engaging with this, with you on this matter. My final thanks again to our speakers. Unfortunately, Oyen had to leave early, so my thanks to everyone else, and I hope that this has been useful for you. For me, it's been an absolute privilege. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everyone. Real pleasure. It was really a fantastic session.
Thanks, everyone.